Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to be offering a glimpse into English pronunciation errors typically made by Spanish speakers who are in the process of learning English either as a foreign language or as a second language. My name is Henry Sevilla and I'm a professor of English, a translator and a researcher at the National University and at the University of Costa Rica. And so let me show you a little bit of background, and this is going to help explain why I'm doing this video. Number one, I have been an EFL professor for quite a while now, and also a researcher. And along the course of my career, I have noticed that some English words are quite challenging for speakers learning English whose native language is Spanish. And most importantly, that many of these students don't know that the easiest words are the ones that might be more difficult to pronounce. And also, I believe that there is a need to train future teachers and language users in general so that communication can take place effectively. What am I going to be covering in this quick video? Number one, what the video is about, what the video is not about, and a typology of English pronunciation errors, which is the main focus of my talk. Okay, what this video is and what this video is not about. It is about four main things. Number one, errors involving phoneme, allophone, and consonant cluster realization or pronunciation. Epenthetic errors, especially with word initial consonant clusters. And in case you're wondering what epenthesis is, it is the insertion of an extra phoneme or sound where we shouldn't be inserting that. Then I'll talk about errors involving stress allocation or placement. And then I'll talk finally about errors in ELT terminology. That is errors that happen when we are doing English language teaching. So this video is not about a dialectal focus on pronunciation. It is not a full typology. Like I said, I'll be focusing on four aspects or four types of pronunciation errors. And it is not an account of errors made by speakers of other languages. It's focused on speakers of learners of English whose native language is Spanish, and it is not an excessively simplified account of the matter. In other words, you have to bear with me. I'll be using specialized terminology to describe some linguistic phenomena. Let's get down to business. So the typology of English pronunciation errors focusing on four broad categories. Category number one is phoneme, allophone, and consonant cluster realization, or like I said, pronunciation. And the first case with this is the substitution of voiced post-alveolar retroflex for voiced alveolar tap sounds. So Spanish speakers learning English might say juror instead of juror with the retroflex R in English for the word juror, which is spelled on the right. They might also say Führer instead of Führer, which also can be said with an open O, Führer. And also they might say three instead of three with the retroflex R. The next case is quite interesting, and it happens with the word internet, which many students say pronounce as ethernet instead of internet or internet. So what they're doing is they substituting the full NT cluster or the elided end phonemes for a flap. Quite common in especially in beginners who are, in beginning students. The other one is the substitution of a voiceless interdental fricative sound or a voiced interdental fricative sound. Let me go and be more specific. So they might say methodology or methodology instead of methodology with a voiceless interdental fricative sound. Along the same lines, they might say theory instead of theory, once more with a voiceless interdental fricative sound, and they might say other instead of other with a voiced, this time, interdental fricative sound. There are other substitutions. So for instance, with the word target, they might say target, or they might say education instead of education, or they might say schedule instead of schedule. I know that the British pronounce this differently sometimes. They might say adquire instead of acquire, and that is because in Spanish, instead of this C here, we have a D. So they say adquire instead of a plain and simple acquire. They might say conclusion instead of conclusion, and they might say pencil with a Spanish E, tense E sound, instead of pencil with a schwa here. They might say level with the Spanish E sound instead of the English schwa level. The second broad category I want to talk about is epenthetic errors, and like I said earlier, epenthesis is the insertion of a segment where normally that we don't or we shouldn't be inserting that segment, and so that happens because Spanish doesn't have ST or SM or SN clusters word initially, so students normally or learners insert an extra sound at the beginning, a schwa sound, and sometimes a Spanish e sound. So instead of saying stop, they say stop. Or instead of saying street, they might say street. Or instead of saying smash, they say smash. Or instead of saying sneeze, they say sneeze. And then instead of saying, for instance, scan, they say scan. Or instead of saying scenario, they say scenario. So very typical, very common, and again, that is because of a negative transfer from Spanish into English. We don't have those clusters in Spanish. The next broad category is, I think, in my personal opinion, more interesting and more complex, and that involves stress allocation errors. And in my opinion, those are the most common mistakes, and students are usually unaware that they're making these mistakes. The first subcategory regarding stress allocation errors takes place with words of Latin origin. Now, words of Latin origin are very easy to recognize for us Spanish speakers because Spanish is a Romance language. It came from Latin, but they're usually very difficult to pronounce because English changes stress placement for those words. And so the first three words that I want to focus on are the three most commonly mispronounced English words in my opinion and in my experience. And they are communicative, cooperative, and collaborative. And they're very important because they're very specific words. English teachers use them all the time, and they usually get wrong stress placement. So one more time, communicative, cooperative, and collaborative. I promise I will mention these three words before the end of the video because, again, they're really important. Efficacy is another one. And the other one is subsequent, stress on the first syllable, stress on the first syllable also. Evaluate, stress goes on the second syllable. Evaluation, that goes on the third syllable. Fourth. Evaluation, fourth syllable. And then we have other words of Latin origin, which are also commonly mispronounced. Correct takes the stress on the second syllable and not on the first one. This is super common. Quantitative stress or primary stress should go on the first syllable and not on the second one. Qualitative also is stressed on the first syllable. Category is also stressed on the first syllable. At least primary stress falls there. There is more than just primary stress, but for now, let us focus on primary stress. Profile is also accented on the first syllable, and these are the common errors that Spanish speakers learn and English make. I won't pronounce them so that we can focus on the right stress allocation. So one more time, correct, quantitative or quantitative, qualitative, category, and profile. And then we have, in terms of stress allocation, words of Germanic origin. And so what happens here is that words coming from Germanic languages such as Anglo-Saxon or Old English, two things could happen. The first one is that the prefixes that we attach to the words don't modify the stress placement of the base word. And that is the case of prefixes of the prefixes un, out, over, and under. So we say undo, outdo, overlook, understand, and unhook, outclass, overdress. So the main word or the base word is not affected by the prefix. But there are cases where the prefix does affect the stress allocation of the word. And that is the case when the prefix is acting as a noun, and therefore the resulting word is a noun compound. And as a general rule, we might remember that noun compounds are usually, for the most part, accented on the first part. So we say forearm, outlook, overalls, underdog, upshot, and not forearm, and not outlook, and not overalls, for example. So again, this is because the prefix is acting as a noun, and therefore this is a noun compound, and noun compounds are generally accented on the first element. The fourth broad category, this is the fourth and last category I want to talk about, is terminology that is commonly used in ELT, English language teaching. And this is so important because it is the professional terminology that we English teachers use, and I believe we should pronounce it in the best way we can. I will repeat the first three words I started talking about when we hit stress allocation: communicative, cooperative, and collaborative, just because they are very important words. And I also want to say that their corresponding adverbs are pronounced or are accented in the same way. So we say communicatively, cooperatively, collaboratively. Pedagogy is a word that gets mispronounced in terms of stress allocation. The stress or the primary stress should go in pe, and then goji or goji receives secondary stress. So pedagogy, and not pedagogy, which is a common mistake. Imagery is also commonly mispronounced. The stress should go on the first syllable. Objective is also commonly mispronounced. The stress should go on the second syllable and not on the first one. And this brings us to a few more words. Questionnaire is normally accented on the last syllable. That's probably because it's a French word. Literature is usually accented. No, this one is always accented on the first syllable. Literacy is always accented on the first syllable. And interestingly, pronunciation is accented on the fourth syllable. Pronunciation. And maintenance is accented on the first syllable. Situation is accented primarily on the third syllable, and figuratively is accented on the first syllable. The same is true for the adverb figuratively. So it's accented on the first, not the second syllable. And so this brings us to connecting the dots. Basically, I'll tell you, or I'll remind you what we have covered in this quick video. So number one, we talked about errors involving phoneme, allophone, and consonant cluster pronunciation or realization. We talked about epenthetic errors, especially with word initial consonant clusters. And we covered errors involving stress placement, which is, again, like I said, one of my favorite topics, but also one of the topics that give students a lot of headaches. And errors that happen in the particular field of English language teaching. And so this brings me to the end of the video. Thank you so very much for watching. If you liked the video or found it useful, please feel free to leave us a like, subscribe to my channel, share the content, and comment down below. If you need to reach me further, then this is my email address one more time. This is my name, Henry Sevilla Morales, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.